without further ado, I'm going to do an introduction for our first speaker of Sunday, who is Mark Johnson. Mark is a developer of Ultima Ratio Regum, a 12-year, so far, project focused on the procedural generation of challenging puzzles, cryptic riddles, and obscure mysteries within an extensive and intricate, visually and culturally detailed world. Think Dwarf Fortress Adventure Mode meets the Outer Wilds, or La Milana. Version 0.11, in which the world becomes finally detailed enough to now actually begin adding in these procedurally generated riddles, is due out in 2024. Alongside his roguelike work, he completed a PhD many years ago, and after various postdocs is now an assistant professor of games research at the University of Sydney. Now relevant, in Sydney, it's 3 a.m., which is very late, and Mark is very sleepy, because it's 3 a.m., and it's amazing that he's here at all. So we are going to play a recorded version of Mark's talk from when he was not sleepy at 3 a.m. on a Sunday, or actually probably maybe a Monday. Yeah, 3 a.m. on a Monday, I believe, Australian time. And then Mark's going to join us for some sleepy Q&A. So let's go ahead and roll generating riddles for a generated world.
Hello everybody, thank you all so much for coming to this talk. I'm here in the chat room as you watch this, but as you watch this, it's 3:30 a.m. here in Sydney, and even though I'm a very late riser and very late worker, 3:30 a.m. is just a little bit too late even for me. It would have been fine when I was 18, it's less fine now. So I've decided to go with this polished recorded version instead, but I'll be in the chat room to hang out and chat while I'm giving the talk here. So, this talks about procedurally generating cryptic puzzles and riddles in roguelikes, but firstly we need to look at what I'm talking about when I talk about cryptic puzzles and riddles, and the best place to start here is with Japanese indie game La Mulana. In La Mulana, the player explores a vast world filled with puzzles that begin as merely cryptic or obscure, but later on, as the game's difficulty ramps up, require the use of extensive note-taking, map drawing, deduction, and astonishingly precise and meticulous observation of the in-game world. Much like something like NetHack, beating the game without the use of spoilers, although it has been done in both cases, is seen as being almost impossible. It's one of my favourite games of all time, and a chief inspiration behind quite a large part of my own game design work. So to start off with, I think an example of this genre of cryptic puzzle, riddle, mystery is quite useful here. So quite late in La Mulana, the player encounters this room with these giant scales, and finds that by pressing the buttons on each side, gemstones can be dropped down onto each side of the scales. And it's made clear that by balancing them, something in the chest at the bottom of the screen can be acquired. But the issue is how to know the weights of the gems, and therefore how to know how to balance these scales. Well, clues in this game are scattered quite widely across a massive world and are in general found on these things called tablets. So this tablet, for instance, in a completely different zone from the scales, tells us that each gem is known as a heart, in air quotes, and has a colour and some kind of thematic link. Although, of course, the player here has to make the link between this tablet and the scales puzzle they've just seen. We also note that 2 of the gems are both described as being white, so how might we distinguish them, and 2 of the colours are unknown. But even so, this clue is the kind of first step towards making sense of this puzzle. Elsewhere in the game, and I stress this is a game which can take hundreds of hours if you're playing spoiler-free, so all these clues might be seen across hours or even tens of hours apart, is another clue for the player to realise is part of the same puzzle. And this clue tells us what each heart, what each gem weighs. Combining these 2 clues tells the player a great deal, but we still don't know some of the colours for some of the gems, nor how to distinguish between the 2 white gems. And so what at first looks like quite a kind of simple puzzle, once you have these 2 clues, which talk about colour and weight, in fact unravels to feature far more pieces than it at first seems, and requiring far more disambiguation in terms of colour and weight in order to make sense of which gems should go where. Then, in yet another completely unrelated part of the game world, is yet another clue which mentions a sapphire gem. Sapphires are blue, of course, and so we then know once we found this clue that the blue gem, one of the 2 we didn't know the specifics of, is a sapphire, and so the last gem must be whatever's left over. With this third clue, some of the ambiguity in those first 2 clues, especially the first one which was missing some words, has thus now been resolved. Then, in yet another location, another clue turns up, and this one explains the white gem representing purity. So think back to the first clue, where each gem had some kind of thematic association or link, is the diamond gem, and so the other one must be the other white gem. Again, through this clue, combined with the prior three, we gain more clarity over how these gems work and how each of these gemstones is being defined by the game. So with all this data, we can now add up the weights of the gems divided by 2 and feel confident we know exactly which gem is which color and which shape, and thereby be able to split them onto both sides of the scales and finish this puzzle. But when we do that, they come to an odd number, which is pretty frustrating. But the player seems to be able to jump on the scales themselves, so maybe the player's weight will be the deciding factor here. But how can we find that out? With this question, the puzzle once more expands. In yet another location is a hard to reach and very, very, very easy to miss pair of scales, although the game does not in fact tell you they are scales. When you stand on them, it tells you the player's weight, as we see here, but it does so in the game's fictional language. And so another step of this puzzle now presents itself. We need to figure out what these numbers mean if we are to then work out the player's weight and thereby work out which gems go on which side and which side the player should jump on to balance these scales. We can tell the player doesn't weigh 11 or 22 or 33 and so on, as we see 2 symbols here rather than 1, but beyond that we can't know anything more. So we need to work out how to read this language. To solve this part of the puzzle, there are a number of options, but the easiest one is to find this tablet. The written content is unimportant for this puzzle, but the important thing here is that the tablet has the numbers 1 through 9 and 0. The player at this point then has to remember that they can turn off the functioning game, which automatically translates the runes text into English, and then by comparing the English text to the runes text, can compare which characters are which numbers, as the language is just a simple substitution cipher in essence, and work out what the player weighs. And it turns out the player weighs 61 something. And so with all this info, we can finally solve the puzzle. The sum total weight of the gems and the player adds to 488, which does divide by 2. And with a little bit of manipulation of the numbers, the only way to get those numbers up to 244 on both sides is in the way I've put down here. So on one side there's 4 gems, on the other side are the other 3 gems, and then right at the end, the player also must jump on the side with 3 gems, and then both sides will weigh the same. And the puzzle, after all these sequence of clues across huge portions of the game world, will finally be solved. And so with that, we can finally bring together all these different components to complete this tricky puzzle. One of the things that makes puzzles in these games, and La Mulana is a great example of this, so compelling I think, is that every puzzle requires something a bit different. Maybe some do require you to do maths, but maybe others need you to understand the game's language. Some need you to pay attention to the layout of the map, or the layout of specific areas, or the names of areas, or the names of rooms, or what NPCs will say to you, or even obscure things in the background of a room one would normally never even pay attention to. And this ability to consistently provide new sorts of puzzles which always demand new kinds of attention and new kinds of thinking outside the box and new ways to kind of address oneself to the in-game content and to rethink what's important here, what matters here, what aspects of the game's world and what the game is showing me, what aspects of these matter, is very compelling. And this is quite different, I think, from having a kind of single puzzle type and then iterating on that puzzle type over and over and over. I think this is hugely compelling, these kinds of cryptic puzzle, riddle, mystery type puzzles, and are also very, very tough for the player as well. Now, there are, of course, many other games with these sorts of puzzles. This style, I think, really came to its first prominence with Mist and Riven, but can also be found elsewhere. Fez, for instance, presents itself first and foremost as a puzzle platformer for most of the game's length, but then also becomes extremely cryptic towards the end. Another game which pulls a similar kind of trick in some sense is Environmental Station Alpha, which starts as a fairly standard, though extremely good, Metroidvania, before then becoming this large and very cryptic hidden end game when you're close to completing the game. The Outer Wilds, in turn, is probably the most famous recent example, I think, and Tunic also is a game from just the last few years, which features a lot of these similar kinds of cryptic puzzle riddle challenges in it. Now, I love these sorts of puzzles, so I'm now going to give an example of a similar puzzle from my roguelike game, Ultima Ratio Regum. This has been a game I've been making for 12 years, and I promised that had I known it would become such a large part of my life, or indeed a project that so many people would care about, I would not have chosen some obscure Latin phrase as its name, but it's done now. Anyway, what I want to kind of explore here is, given the roguelikes, of course, are heavy on procedural content generation, how can we combine these sorts of extremely multi-layered and multi-parted complex cryptic puzzles into a roguelike setting? So, let's get on to the puzzle to give you an example of the sort of cryptic puzzles I'm in the process of working into the game. So let's say you come across the holy book of a religion. In this case, the book is called the Green Precepts, and tells us the ways and worship of a god called the Child of the Saplings. Partway through reading this book, maybe we notice some information that sounds like we might be able to explore more deeply. Nothing here is explicitly told to the player, but it just smells like maybe there's a quest here, maybe there's something more we can do here. I think it's important with these sorts of puzzles that no quest marker or quest log or things of this sort comes up. That far more organic process of discovery, of noticing something and having learned that kind of confidence in the game to know that if you explore it further it will go somewhere, that's far more rewarding than the game kind of explicitly highlighting, hey, there's something here you might want to look at and you might want to spend some time on. So, specifically, here's the text in question. We read about two famous saints of this religion who meditated in particular places, and in doing so offered sacred pottery at these locations, and that others who do the same might be rewarded. Maybe, in the process of playing, this holy book is the first we've read of this. It's the first time we've heard of these saints, and the idea that those who follow in their footsteps might get something out of it. So how might we then, as the player, go about learning more and figuring out how to perform this ritual in order to secure this prize? Well, for starters, let's find a religious building. For this religion, it's known as a hermitage, it seems, and find ourselves a local priest we might be able to talk to in order to learn some more. Now we've found him, maybe we have a chat with him and ask him about his religious beliefs, his holy book and the like, and sure enough, after a certain point, he tells us what we need to know about the two saints we've just read about, and how to go about trying to reproduce their pilgrimage. Specifically, he says, one saint can be learned about from a local merchant who sells mighty blades, which sounds like it might well mean swords, for instance. And for the other, we should look behind the easternmost statue in the vestry of one of this religion's hermitages near a poorhouse in the north of this city. So now we know where to go to get some more data. So first, maybe we take a look at the city and spot there is indeed one almshouse in one of the two northernmost districts of the city. We go to this zone and we enter the religious building and we take a look at some of the walls there. Most of them don't contain anything special, but sure enough, and there's a statue of the god as well, most don't contain anything, but the wall directly to the east of that statue, as was told us, has an inscription on it we hadn't spotted before, and this inscription mentions a place of nourishment and where air flows through the mines. So these are the things we might need to decipher if we are to work out where to go to complete the first half of this pilgrimage. So, to do that, we can have a look around some of the towns in this civilization, for instance, which all use a similar sort of naming style, and although the first few don't seem right, this southernmost town here, called Skull of the Skies, seems to hit the second part of the clue well, and sure enough, it has a granary, so maybe that's the solution. With this new data, we now have the two key parts of this first clue translated: which town to visit and where to place this first pot in order to mirror what the saints in this religion once did long ago. So, we do indeed travel there, we find our way to the granary in this town, and we place a piece of pottery down. That, assuming we've understood this first clue correctly, should be the first part of this quest complete. So now we can go back and take a look at the second part and see what we might need to do there as well. Let's therefore look back again at what the priest had to say. We've done the second part, but now the first part. We want to find a local merchant, and supposedly they have some info on what the second saint got up to and where they went to meditate. So, we leave that housing district and travel to the local market district and find our way to the appropriate merchant, who in this case is indeed a swordsmith. We can have a quick chat with them and indeed confirm that they worship the right religion, so it looks like this is indeed the merchant we need to be engaging with. Later, we find their home, and alongside the normal chairs and tables and bed and so forth, we do indeed find that they have a note, although it's quite a cryptic one. Let's take a closer look at it. A cold hand holds a gem and the bane of Iroquois VIII, below which the sacred pot was placed, facing the dread slum beyond. Well, we've seen that there is a slum on the edge of the city, so we're probably in the right place, and the mention of the sacred pot tells us this is referring to the same religion whose ritual we are trying to decipher. This clue, however, seems to have many more pieces than the previous one, so let's see whether we can make sense of it. Well, taking a first look again at the city we are in confirms it's called Fist of the Snow, which is very close indeed to a cold hand. So I think it looks like we are staying within this city for this one, rather than going to one of the outlying towns. We also then maybe have a look over the districts in this city, and note we have a lot of different taverns here, such as the Brave Witch, the Quill and Cat, which sounds like a great place to drink, many others, and one here called the Sapphire and Gambler. A sapphire is, of course, a gem, so maybe this is a clue. But does this match with the other part of the clue, describing the bane of a past king of this nation? To find out the answer to this, let's consult another book, The Life and Times of Iroquois VIII. On a page, a fair bit into the book, we do indeed find some very useful data here. I quote, Iroquois VIII this time also began to frequent the houses of gambling to be found within Fist of the Snow. One of these, the Hall of Wagers, spread a number of different games, and his grace was soon found to be spending much of the royal treasury here. This came to a head in 1505 when the chief of taxes, Amontog Gotomanog, a great name, felt herself forced to take action and address Iroquois VIII's behaviour, both in the Hall of Wagers and elsewhere, which was proving ruinous to the finances of the realm. So, that seems pretty clear that being a gambler was indeed a major issue in this king's reign, so now we can perhaps be pretty confident that the tavern previously identified, the Sapphire and Gambler, is indeed the one we want for this part of the quest. So, let's look back at the clue. We know the city is Fist of the Snow. One of the taverns is the Sapphire and Gambler, which satisfies the conditions of the gem and the bane of this king, which are, metaphorically speaking, held within a cold hand, i.e. the name of the city. Billy B. Lowwich might tell us to head into the basement, and then tells us where to put the sacred pot, i.e. against the east wall of the tavern's basement, since that faces the city's slum. Now, again, let's put this into action. We travel to the right district and fast travel to the tavern. We head inside, hop down into the basement. I hope the innkeep doesn't mind this. Head to the rightmost wall and place the pot down. That should now be both clues fully deciphered. So, time to check back with the priest. We return to the priest who first gave us information about this quest, and as we chat to him, he quickly confirms we have indeed successfully followed in the steps of the two saints of the Child of the Sapling, and has given us a gift. This rather handsome religious relic, a nice golden goblet. Now, let's take stock of this puzzles, and this is the really key part of this talk, I think, now. The puzzle in La Mulana was, of course, completely handmade. Every aspect of it was created specifically by the designers to yield this one exact puzzle, including what the clues were, where they were, how the player was meant to make connections between the clues, the unique room in which the puzzle is in fact solved, the specific values of each piece, the relationships to other puzzles, such as translating the language, and so on and so forth. And now we come to the big reveal, which I know people who do follow my work will have already guessed, is that the puzzle I showed off in Ultima Ratio Regum, although being of roughly equal complexity and crypticness, was entirely and wholly procedurally created. To be clear what I mean by that, I mean that every single component of this quest, in air quotes, was completely unique to a given playthrough and will never be created again for any other player. The religious building we explored to find the priest in was generated, as was the priest himself. The note we found with those 5 aspects that needed deciphering was also procedurally generated. Both of the books were wholly generated, their names, their covers, and the contents inside them. The inscription we found on the wall in the religious building in the Hermitage was also entirely generated by the game, along with the 2 components that made up that clue, and indeed the lovely religious relic the priest gave us as a reward for figuring it all out was also entirely generated from a system that can create tens of thousands of unique goblets. So every single part of this quest was procedurally created, rather than being handmade by me as the designer. So, in the second half of this talk, I'm going to say a little bit about how I go about creating these puzzles and making sure that they work correctly. Firstly, how are these puzzles and their clues created? Well, firstly, in URR, one thing I do is I track all features that are going to be created within a certain zone or in a certain building, even if they haven't been created yet, and I do so in pretty meticulous detail. So let's say I know, for instance, that when the player arrives within a certain district in a certain city, the game will create a great cathedral, which might look something like this. But the cathedral isn't in fact there yet. But even though that's the case, the game nevertheless has all of the data to address itself to a kind of abstracted descriptive version of that cathedral, even though the thing itself has not been created yet by the game. The world map is huge, and areas are only generated when they are needed, both for performance reasons and for minimizing the memory demands of the game. But all of this data beforehand means I can create, the game, can create clues that reference the abstract of something, and then when the player arrives, lo and behold, the thing being talked about in that clue is there. Even though the stuff the clue is referencing has only come into being once the player in fact gets there and takes a look at it, it seems as if it's always been there because the abstract data is sufficiently detailed to predict what it will look like once it's been created. The second part, and once more people who read my devlog will know I'm very big on this, is to ensure maximum variation. This doesn't necessarily mean, for instance, level design variation as it might in most roguelikes, although the game does track things like cardinal directions, as in the case of the statue and the writing on the wall in the generated riddle puzzle we just saw, but more in terms of the in-game visuals. For example, here's a set of potential statues in the game, and this is a image generator which has several billion permutations of what statues of gods and also historical figures, though in this example they are all gods, can look like. And so part of the objective here is to make sure that there's always a tremendous wealth of things which can be described or can be talked about or can be referenced, such as what is the god holding, where is it pointing, what kind of head does it have, what's it wearing, where's the statue found, and things of this sort. And then in turn, another key thing here is to make sure every bit of those things can in turn. The third is to have the game always create a huge number of ways to refer to everything, in essence. Here are some examples of how the city we used in the example I showed, Fist of the Snow, might be referred to in clues. This can be applied to anything, and I've coded in essentially as many ways as I can think of to do this for other things in the game as well. This can also take place across multiple levels, as in the case of the Iroquois the Eighth's Bane clue, as that's a clue which itself requires you to hunt down more info before it can be deciphered, rather than just expecting you to think through synonyms and so on. It's also really important to make sure there's always enough data, i.e. the player always can access all pieces required to solve a puzzle, rather than having one piece be out of reach or never be created by the game, and so on. The first part of this involves cross-referencing everything, and what this means is maximizing how much stuff the player can figure out without having to be told everything, such as by making sure that civilizations, religions, and so on have highly consistent aesthetics in terms of colors, shapes, and symbols, and so on, but also making sure that when you read books, the books talk about people, and when you talk to NPCs, they talk about other NPCs and places and books and so on, so that there's as many options as I can get for the player to kind of break in to each one of these riddle chains. It's also extremely important to ensure the player can start a cryptic riddle puzzle in many ways. Given how vast the game world is, it's roughly 2.5 billion tiles if the player in fact went and looked at every single tile. With dozens of nations and dozens of religions and hundreds of settlements, we need lots of ways to ensure the player is always able to get access to the game's puzzles. When the player starts a new game in a forthcoming version, they'll be started off with some fairly simple clues that are all to do with their home nation. But beyond that, we need to make sure the player is always able to find new ones. This is largely achieved by changing the structure of the puzzles. The obvious structure might be something like this, where you have something that sets you onto the puzzle, you follow several steps, and then conclude the puzzle. However, a far better structure is something like this, where you have a large number of different lead-ins to the same puzzle scattered all over the place, such as talking to an NPC or reading a book or visiting a certain place or being somewhere at a certain time, and these sorts of things, and then a number of pieces within the puzzle that all point towards each other and lead collectively to the solution. In this regard, what I hope is clear is that the puzzle for my game I showed off here a few minutes ago is in fact an early demo of creating these sorts of cryptic puzzles and riddles. I hope to go a great deal deeper, but this is the start, and these multiple ways in are extremely important. And lastly, how are the triggers created, as in how does the game notice when you've done one of these cryptic puzzles? This, when I began coding all this stuff, struck me as one of the toughest parts of the entire thing, because the game has to create its own procedural triggers for each riddle, and then check them at the right times, without bogging the game down in constant trigger checking to check if the players just solved something or not. In fact, strangely enough, triggers turned out to be the easiest part, even though the game does have to procedurally create every single one for every single puzzle. Essentially, each trigger is stored as a tuple, where the first part says what action should cause this trigger to be looked at. Every time one action which can have triggers associated with it is done, the game checks all potential sets of riddle answers, and only those where the first action is the thing which the player's just done are looked at in more detail. After that, each tuple then goes into more info to make sure the player has done the exactly precise thing they're meant to do. So in this case, you have to hold up some item. In this case, it's a sword, and then the next pieces of this tuple tell you at what exact x and y coordinates it must be held up. And then the final set, which can be nothing or can be quite long, is a list of modifiers. So for instance, in this case, it doesn't just have to be a sword at that location. It must also be a full moon at night, and the sword must be long tracive different from the one whose lands this puzzle is being solved within. In turn, each location on the world map then has a list of triggers to apply to that zone. When some action is taken, it looks only for tuples in that area of the world map and check what the action type is in each trigger. If it's the wrong type, like I say, then the rest is ignored, and if it's the right action type, then the game spends a millisecond longer checking all of the details to make sure whether or not it's correct. And so in this way, these generated keys, as it were, are extremely computationally easy for the game to both create and to check on quite a regular basis. So, where does this leave us? Well, I think where this leaves us is this, that the potential I've got here for essentially an arbitrary level of complexity per step, because of these indefinitely long chains of connection and implication which can be built here, combined with the fact that we can have any number of steps from the start of one of these cryptic riddles to the end of it, means that there's very easy scaling of difficulty here. So the example puzzle from the game I showed off on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is the simplest and 10 is the absolute hardest I plan to build, is maybe no more than a 2 or 3. It's all based on one nation. All the clues are fairly kind of clear-ish in terms of what they're getting at, but there's a lot of scope here for far more complex and far more multi-layered and faceted puzzles as the player gets more skilled and finds their way into increasingly complex and challenging riddles. And also, of course, there's still many more pieces to add as just a little kind of teaser here. And, of course, if you will forgive me for doing a little teaser here, text-based clues, or rather word-based riddles and clues, are not the only types of clues we can have. So, for instance, the game can also create these sorts of letter-based clues, and I don't really want to kind of explain more on how these are solved right now, as that's part of the mystery. And also, the game can procedurally create these sorts of clues. Again, what that could mean is open to the player to work out, and also these sorts of clues too. And in each playthrough, not just will these specific scraps of paper be created, but also the meanings of these symbols, these letters, these words, these thematic associations, and so on, will vary each time. I think that's pretty much everything. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Please do give me a shout on Twitter or by email or my website if you have any thoughts or comments or questions. And I'm also in the chat room right now to talk for a little while. Although I think once it's 4 a.m. my time, I will have to call it a day. Please also note everything I've shown here is still in dev and might therefore change a little bit between now and release. Anyway, thanks again so much. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of conference. Thanks all. Take care. Bye for now.
Wonderful. Hi, Mark.
Hello everybody. Hi there. Thank you for listening to the pre-recorded version.
Yeah, no, thank you for doing that. Appreciate you. I'm glad when we do the virtual event that we get to have guests from far away, but yeah, it's a bit early, but we do have time for a question, maybe two. As you might have seen, the first question, which I think is a reasonable one, how do you go about debugging a procedurally generated riddle or story like this from
with tremendous difficulty. Debugging has always been a real problem for the game. Essentially, I have a bunch of ways of only looking at the riddles in the game while looking at absolutely nothing else, and then allowing them to just create themselves over and over and over, 1,000 times, and then checking a kind of illustrative subset of those riddles. And I'm sure it's not perfect. Like I said in chat, I've just put out a release with 200 plus bug fixes, which I think speaks to some of the issue here. But hopefully it'll work. Yeah.
Yeah, no, excellent. I mean, that's interesting. That reminds me even of yesterday, like Elliot talking about the name generator of, like spit out some demonstrative examples, look at them, go from that. So yeah, that makes sense. Here's a question from Yanez. When tracking down a treasure, is there something preventing key people to ask for info from dying or from one of those important objects holding clues to be destroyed?
That's a really good question. The answer is right now, no. Right now, it could definitely happen, that you throw a grenade at a wall and the wall's destroyed, but that wall had the crucial bit of data on it. So in terms of the lead into the puzzles, because like I mentioned, I'm trying to make sure all the puzzles have many, many ways to gain access. I don't think that's so much of an issue there, but there's definitely still scenarios where even if there's 10 lead-ins, if all those lead-ins are books, people's places, and so on, all the books are destroyed, all the people die, all the places are blown up in some way, and so on. So I don't yet have a really good solution to that. I think I'll probably need to have some kind of higher level system which keeps track of how many clues still exist, and when one of them is destroyed or rendered in such a way it can't be accessed and so on, that it will create a new one and kind of fake the new clue so that it looks like it was always there, even though it wasn't in fact always there until the old ones got destroyed. So that doesn't happen yet, but it's a pretty niche edge case. It's one I do need to deal with, but right now it's not dealt with.
Yeah, well, I like that. And, like you got into, part of the answer is that you don't rely on only one way in. And so you have that, like, a lot of things need to go wrong before it truly, like, every input has been destroyed now, which is a nice way to prevent that. One, I think, possibly last question from Snow is, so clarifying in a technical sense, is it kind of like a cascade of random selection within kind of further cascades of like, okay, you start with 6 secret important items, you choose which will lead to the items, and then you choose how to represent it, you choose if it's a book, how to represent the book.
Yeah, so in essence, in game, I think I call them checkpoints. So I'm thinking of that as like, what are the points within the puzzle chain when you have enough data to move on to the next set of things, which will give you the next bunch of hints. And so it creates a chain of those, and then once it's created those, it thinks about how can I distribute the clues for each part of this chain. So are there books, people, places, and so on. And then for each of those, it creates the, is this an inscription upon a wall? Is this a book? Is this something someone will say? Is this how a statue looks? Is this how an altar looks? Is this a secret room inside someone's house? Whatever. Right now, someone in the chat, in fact, said it's funny how the priest is kind of putting his religion out to the merchant here. Right now, it doesn't check for logical links. It just makes links right now. Again, that's something to work on, which I will do. But right now, it might go from priest to merchant to like a cave in the outback somewhere to this thing to that thing. And while that has kind of a certain charm, and in some ways that's quite close to what Lab Mulan does in some places, I do want a more logical chain to always be present. So that will happen, but it hasn't yet.
Right. Excellent. Okay, well, thank you so much, and thank you again for staying up so late so that we could have this little bit of live Q&A. Please go get some sleep, and thank you very much for your talk. Everyone loved it, as you saw in chat.